Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And on Friday evening, it was announced by chief negotiators for both the EU and the UK that Brexit talks had been paused. On Saturday evening, after discussions between Johnson and von der Leyen, the joint statement from the British Prime Minister and EU Commission President said that talks would resume in Brussels on Sunday, i.e. today as you're watching this. In this video, I'll be explaining what exactly is going on. You can then make your own mind up about whether it is good or bad news. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Brexit's heating up here. It's all getting a bit squeaky bum time, as Sir Alex Ferguson used to say. Essentially, what has happened is that the technical details of the Brexit deal between the UK and the EU have been worked out. The reason the talks have paused is not because one side became exasperated, even though I'm sure that is true potentially of both sides, but because there was nothing for the negotiators to do. They'd done their job as far as they could. What is required now is political input. That input, you know, in theory could have been made between the time that I'm recording this and you're viewing it. I doubt it. I don't think there's really going to be any updates today as you're watching this. I think Monday we'll have to wait for that, maybe even Tuesday. But, you know, given the limited time that is now available, it is entirely possible that things could move extremely quickly now. But assuming that it hasn't, essentially Boris Johnson needs to make a political decision. Now, you could argue that a political shift from the EU would also unlock the deal, but that's not happening. Not just because they are in the stronger position, but because on the outstanding issues, they don't really have room for manoeuvre. On one of them, they definitely don't have room for manoeuvre at all. It would be dead against EU rules and the best interest of literally every single component of the EU. There's another issue where, in theory, there's room for manoeuvre on the EU's part, but not in practice. I'll explain that one. And on the third, yeah, technically there is room for manoeuvre from the EU as well as the UK, but politically difficult. Politically difficult, not impossible. But of course, all three have to be agreed for a deal. In fact, you know, until you've agreed 100% of a deal, you have 0% of a deal. So the area where there's no room for the EU to move is the level playing field. That's just a fact. Accept it or not. If Johnson accepts it, we can get a deal. If he doesn't, then we can't. It's as simple as that. Boris Johnson can try and dress up an agreement in smoke and mirrors if he likes, and the EU will go along with it. But he agreed to the level playing field before leaving the EU. It's in the withdrawal agreement, in the political declaration. And if he wants a deal, he's going to have to adhere to that promise. That's as simple as that. The problem is that Johnson and the other Brexiteers took the view that the withdrawal agreement essentially was in two parts, which it was. It's two separate documents. You've got the legally binding portion. That is the international treaty. And then you've got the non-legally binding political declaration. And anything in the political declaration was going to be dropped without consequence. Brexiteers were laughing about this a year ago. It's public knowledge that that's what they intended to do. And this is what I and others said very clearly over a year ago. Boris Johnson even moved things from the legally binding portion. Remember, the withdrawal agreement was essentially worked out by Theresa May. She had things in the legally binding portion, certain rights for us, things like that, environmental standards as well. Boris Johnson moved them to the political declaration. Why have you done that, Prime Minister, he was asked. Don't worry, we intend to keep all of it. But why have you moved it to the... Why didn't you just leave it in the legally binding portion? Don't sweat it. We're fine. We're good. We're going to agree to all of it. It was obvious he was never going to honour the political declaration. That part of the withdrawal agreement was going to be thrown straight in the bin. I mean, he's not even honouring the legally binding portion at the moment, has to be said. So the EU can't make a political decision to ignore this. Either the EU accepts it or there's no deal. That's it. The other part's less simple. So then there's the issue of governance, one of the three outstanding issues. Now, in theory, the EU could insist on a lighter touch here. Governance essentially refers to dispute resolution. So if one side is perceived to breach the agreement by the other, what can be done about it? What redress exists? The EU would prefer that the European Court of Justice deals with those matters. Naturally, that is toxic to Brexiteers. They'd never accept it. No problem. EU aren't insisting on that. So what is needed is an arbitration panel resourced jointly by the EU and the UK. That's fair enough, isn't it? It's a court that we both run. EU are absolutely fine with that. The UK also say they're fine with it, but refuse to agree the details. Now, the reason why in practice the EU will insist on this being a very detailed part of the eventual deal is that they cannot trust the UK government. In many international agreements, there is often a very high level of trust, especially between nations with common values. So you don't need to hammer home the fine points of dispute resolution. You don't have to constantly say, well, what if we think that you go back on your promise for this, that or the other? You don't make agreements on the assumption that the other side's going to go back on them. You know, those sort of things don't really come up that often. And if they do come up, they don't come up in a major way and you can usually sort of deal with it. However, 8 months after signing the withdrawal agreement with the EU, the UK government said to the world in its own parliament that they were going to break it, and in a way that would threaten peace in Ireland. I mean, that's a hell of a way to break an agreement you only just signed a few months ago. Who on earth would be stupid enough to trust a government who's done that? I'm not sure anyone would be, but the EU definitely aren't going to. So in reality, this issue also needs dealing with. That is a fact. You know, that the UK are dragging their feet on it only adds to the suspicion that Boris Johnson only wants a deal for political reasons and does intend to break his side of the agreement in a limited and specific way, of course, very early on, maybe even as early as next year. So yeah, the EU want a very clear, detailed and robust system to address this. The final issue is fisheries, of course. Fisheries. Where to start here? I've talked about it enough before. It's worth noting, you know, to the UK generally, or government specifically, it's very odd to make such a big deal of this. I could talk about the stated points of disagreement. For example, the UK want to negotiate access every single year. The EU can't be asked with that, and they want an agreement to last for much longer, maybe even up to 10 years at a time. Now, the EU's position makes more sense, obviously not just from their point of view, but from the point of view of the UK. It helps UK fishermen as well. A fishing business, imagine this. So you're bid for and get a particular quota, and you go, great, I'm going to buy a fishing vessel now. Then a year later they come up again and you don't get it. Well, you're still paying off that boat. You're knackered. You've knackered your business now. So that's no good. You want longer surety, don't you? And that's going to apply to UK fishermen just as much as European ones. The whole issue of fishing isn't both sides wanting the best deal for themselves. It's Boris Johnson's government using it as a diversion. It's the thing that allows him to leave the transition period without a deal, if that's what he ultimately wants, and have a ready excuse. But it is also an issue where the EU, I mean, they could just accept the UK position without huge cost generally, except that for France it is politically complicated. French fishermen are very active in British waters. I mean, they've paid for their access. You know, they weren't just there in large numbers because EU membership. They paid for those quotas. Fishing isn't a free-for-all even in the EU. Access is tightly controlled. So French fishermen, quite rightly, don't want to be screwed over. Now, that could easily be resolved by the UK government compensating the EU fleets. That's all. Wouldn't even cost very much. Won't cost very much at all. It's not a massive portion of our economy. In fact, it's tiny. Pay them off and the UK could do what it liked and the EU wouldn't object, because the European fishermen will be happy. They've been given a crap load of money. They're sorted. But given that that isn't what the UK is proposing to do, because like I said, they don't actually care about fishing, it's just a handy excuse. But because there isn't a compensation solution being pursued as far as I can tell, Macron had to do something. French workers do tend to stand up for their rights very robustly. And they also tend to stick together. I'm sure I'll be told that this attitude goes back to the French Revolution. And Macron is not going to knacker his chances at re-election, which is coming up all too soon for him, which is why he's threatening to use his veto if the EU Commission does agree to something that he doesn't, that as he describes it is not in France's interest. But there could be some genuine movement between both the EU and the UK here. If it were a genuine sticking point and not one invented by Brexiteers as a cunning distraction, there absolutely would be. So that's why there's a pause in the talks. We've been waiting for Boris Johnson to make his mind up for some time, but negotiators were in that time at least able to work on the details of legal text before now. Now they've come to the end of that road. They've done everything they can. So unless and until there are decisions made on those 3 outstanding issues, there are no more technical details to work out. I suppose if there were political movement on one of them, they could discuss that. But where does that leave us? So if a political decision is made to back down on the remaining points, then the talks can obviously resume. Now, they are going to resume anyway, but, I mean, come on. Time's running out. Of course, without all 3 being agreed, like I said, we still won't get a deal in time, but we could work towards one next year, when the UK will, of course, be in a weaker position and the EU can afford to take a harder line. Because this is what Boris Johnson has to be very careful of. He's been bullish about our ability to cope in a no-deal scenario. Well, if we end up with a no-deal scenario, that is going to be put to the test. So if he remains stubbornly indecisive, we're going to see. I wouldn't put any money on him being right, but I would bet the farm on him being wrong. Similarly with the EU. Now, some involved in the process are desperate for a deal to try and avoid the no-deal cliff edge. We can see that. That's fairly obvious. There are some in the EU absolutely argued for a deal, even if it means more compromise on their part. But let's say we go over that no-deal cliff edge anyway and the major damage is done. Well, then that impetus from those within the EU to get that quick deal evaporates as well. Because once they're in that position, once the damage has been done, they'll all agree that they can afford to wait now, which is exactly what they will do. So although talks are continuing tomorrow from me doing this, today from when it's out, there isn't going to be a breakthrough without a decision from Boris Johnson. Negotiators aren't going to magically come up with a way to satisfy both sides without a political change, which neither team is authorised to make. Remember, both sides, the reason for these pause in the talks goes back to the fact that both sides were satisfied that there was no technical work for them to do, so they called it a day. You know, so being told by their political masters, just give it another go, that's not really going to work. You know, my view is I just see it as neither side feels able to make the political movement, but nor do they want to be the ones that call it quits. It is possible that Boris Johnson will make that political movement and then he'll claim that his personal intervention unlocked the deal, which will be true, because him backing down on pointless objections will absolutely unlock the deal. Or it could be that this is the way a no deal is ultimately presented, not with an announcement, but with a slow, lingering realisation that time is up. Problem is, we don't necessarily know when we've got to that point, because we don't definitively know when it absolutely is time up. In the meantime, there is to be an announcement on Monday evening, so we'll see then, I suppose. Hopefully it's not a holding announcement, that it's a definitive announcement of either a deal or a no deal. Bearing in mind, next week Boris Johnson intends to push ahead with a bill in Parliament to break the withdrawal agreement. But there we are. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.